think that there is a difference between showing up somewhere and bleeding on people versus showing up and being vulnerable with people. I don't think you can show up as your full self if you're not being authentic in that way.
Hi, friends, and welcome to Lessons from Living. The mission of our podcast is to motivate change through inspiration. So, we are so glad you're here joining us today. We are going to continue our conversation about leadership. We, in our last episode, talked with Dr. April Minitree about leadership injury. And I thought it would be interesting to hear from a fresh voice in the space today, Laura Ray Reed. Leadership is an important topic right now. I know we've just had the election and there's a change of leadership upcoming. And if you're wondering about what is going on with leadership in our country and what does a good leader look like? I think you will find this conversation today extremely interesting. I look forward to introducing you to Laura Ray Reed. Well, hello, Laura Ray. Thank you so much for joining us today on Lessons from Living.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
great. Well, we've just had a presidential election in this country, so I think there's kind of naturally a focus on the topic of leadership. But I've also been thinking about it generally a good bit too. So I thought it would be a fun topic to handle. I know your company has a leadership focus. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up as a writer focusing on leadership.
Sure. So, obviously, before we hopped on this call, we talked about this little area behind me. I have kind of an eclectic personality. And so, having that type of personality, it was really difficult for me after high school to decide what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I started out in college, the goal was to get a 4 year degree. It didn't happen. I swapped majors like 3 or 4 different times and actually ended up doing a certificate program in pastoral leadership. And so learned about the scriptures. I did an internship for missions out in Houston, Texas. And that's really where the whole concept of leadership kind of took place in my heart. It was not a good experience while I was there. A lot of church hurt went into that. Um, and then I had a slew of jobs after that. So I ended up stepping away from that position and I did some management positions at a pottery studio. I worked at a few coffee shops and I really just saw a poor pattern of poor leadership. It seems to be almost like an epidemic. There's very few leaders out there that genuinely care. There's a lot of managers, a lot of bosses, but I haven't encountered many leaders in my adult life. And so, anyways, I ended up doing writing just because that's kind of what I wanted to do to begin with, but I was kind of positioned away from doing like a English major just because, I didn't want to teach and I didn't want to be a journalist. So I ended up trying to do that freelance. It's stuck. I really enjoy it. And so now with my LLC, it's called The Verdant Leader. I try to write for people who want to be the change, who have very meaningful businesses.
Well, that's great. There's a lot to unpack there. Is there something that, in college I just hear so many young people who go into college without a direction and, like you did, just kind of going from, uh, subject to subject, not really finding a niche there. Is there something that you think would have helped you prior to going into college to not end up in that position?
So I grew up in the South here in the States. And a lot of what I taught, I went to a private school growing up. there was a lot of pressure on me and just kids that I was growing up with to make these big differences, to try to focus on our calling and to find the one thing that we were destined to do on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of stifled a lot of my creativity, which I feel like goes into my freelance writing, what I do for my business. And I was actually, the reason I was cautioned away from getting a bachelor's in English was because my guidance counselor told me it was too cosmopolitan of a career. And really, that the only impact I would have doing something like that would be, like I said, doing journalism or teaching. And I didn't really have an interest in either of those things.
Yeah. Hmm. It's interesting. I am an English major. So
Okay.
so
I
you
mean,
can end
if
up
I were to ever go back to school, that's what I wish I had done. I wish I had just been like, you know what? I like English. I like writing. This is what I want to do. But I didn't. I heeded the warning. And like I said, I like three half majors later, just never
yeah.
even finished. So
Well, I do think it's a major that you can not have a direction with too. So
yeah, that would have been great.
I get what your advisor was advising, but it's useful. You know, there are many different directions
Totally.
that you can take with it. So um, that's really interesting. Well, why do you think the topic of leadership is important?
So I've been working at a coffee shop part time. Not super recently, but since I moved. So my husband and I moved states. We're out in Tennessee now. Last year is when we moved. And so while I was trying to build my business, trying to figure out if I wanted to do an LLC or what I was going to name it, what my focus was going to be, I found myself at yet again working for someone who did not love their job, who did not love the people that they were employing, and some very, I guess, biases that this person had really clouded their judgment and the way that they handled the people that worked for them. And so I was actually a part of a walkout. So the
Mm,
entire staff left. And that's when it just hit me. I was like, I'm already writing. I want to work with people who really care. I don't need to do stuff like helping this employer with their LinkedIn if they're not good people.
yes, yes. I would encourage you to listen to our last episode because we
I
talk
did.
about Oh, you did?
I
Okay,
did.
so leadership entry. Yes, it's a topic I hadn't really um covered before, but I was seeing the same thing that you were seeing, and it was so frustrating to me that leaders are just basic common sense. Be kind. Just let's start there. Okay. Baseline. Be kind. You know, you don't have to be a superstar, but it just
Right.
floored me that people were being hurt by leaders who were in
And I
authority
don't
over
know
them.
when it became so common to not care about
Hmm.
other people. I don't believe that there needs to be some sort of religious aspect to that. Like that's just basic humanity, just care about other people. And that seems to be something that a lot of people in power struggle with.
Yes. Do you have a theory for why that is, or why there's a particular dearth right now of sound leadership?
So I don't know. I can't speak for generations older than me. I'm
Mhm.
not really sure, other than I think that their hierarchies are a little too rigid. I think that they were told growing up that you respect people older than you and you respect people in power and you don't question that. You submit and then you work. You don't say no to opportunity. And I think it's given just a really negative vibe, I guess, to leadership for my generation specifically. And I believe the generation younger than me. It's just not worth the risk of that. I think that I'm a Gen Z, and obviously we question everything, we rebuttal everything. And I just think there's too much risk going in for leadership. Um, like I said, we don't personally feel super valued. And I think that just with everything going on, we've seen so many historical events pass in our young age. And, if you're not leading with a purpose, like, why would I compromise my home life to show up to this job? Why would I say yes to things that don't sit well with me?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
That makes sense. Well, you talk about different leadership styles. Do you think everyone has the capacity to lead?
So I really like this question. It kind of sits with the whole thing that I grew up with, you know, do I have a purpose? What is that one purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe in that so much anymore. I don't believe that we all have one specific thing that we were created to do for the rest of our life. Now I do think that not everyone should be a religious leader. I don't think that everyone should be a political leader. And I don't even think that everyone should be just a manager or an assistant manager. I think that there are specific types of people that really excel in those positions. And I don't think that that is for everyone. But I do think that everyone has the capacity to be a leader. Because really, all leadership is having integrity and caring about others and trying to positively impact your sphere of influence. And we all have a sphere of influence. We all have people that we look up to, that look up to us. And we all come in contact with people every day, whether it's at our job or the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we all have the capacity to positively impact the people that we're coming in contact with.
Yes, well said. I think often the very best leaders are very humble people, but it just seems rare that we end up with those kinds of people in leadership, and that oftentimes you end up with big egos instead. Um, why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people confuse meekness and humility sometimes as being weak. And I think that a lot of those people carry that around with them. I think that if you are someone who is humble, it's quite possible that you've come in contact with people who aren't, or you grew up under adults who recognize that humility in you or that more meek personality. And instead of allowing that to flourish and explaining that this type of personality is great for leadership because you're more empathetic, I think that those people are often labeled shy,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they had a more propensity for being bullied, that kind of thing. And I think that people who aren't quite as humble, or people who just have a more outgoing personality to begin with, they're the star of the show. They're applauded for that. They're not shy. They're
Mm-hmm.
not weak. They're not sensitive. And I think those people are applauded. And so it's easier for them to step into these leadership positions when in reality, there's so many different types of leadership and so many effective ways of being a leader to other people.
Right. So, do you think there's a way to encourage those people who are humble servant leader types to engage in leadership opportunities?
So I do think that some jobs are getting better at this. So I know a lot of employers now are having their employees fill things out like, how do you best receive feedback? How do you learn best? But really, I think it starts at home and it starts in school. I think that having a mindset that teaches children and teaches young adults and meets them where they are, and instead of adding negative or positive labels to a personality type, just pulling them out of like where they're at, you know? So if you have a kid who, like, I was always the kid who cried if I saw someone holding a sign at the end of the road, or if I saw a stray dog, I cried. And instead of labeling someone like me as emotional, how beneficial would it have been for someone to tell me that I'm empathetic? You know, just changing the narrative instead of placing these weak versus strong labels on people, just harboring good things at a young
Yes.
age.
Well, and that empathy is a benefit. It's a good thing.
It
Yeah.
is.
That's it. It's I see what you're saying. Good thoughts. Do you think that leadership is a calling of sorts? You mentioned that word before.
Like I said, I think some people have a knack for certain types of leaderships. I, you know, not everyone is going to be called to be in a position of power, like a political party or like a politician. Not everyone is going to feel the call to
Mhm.
be a pastor or to even be a teacher, things like that. I do think that given our personalities and our strengths and the things that we're good at and the things that we're passionate about, I do think that those shape the decisions that we make and they shape the type of career path or leadership positions that we choose to walk into. But I don't think that there is a special call to
Okay.
be a person of integrity. I don't think that there is a special call to care about others or to want to make a difference. I think that we all have the capacity for that.
Okay. Your company is called the Verdant Leader, is that right?
Yes.
And the word verdant has a number of different meanings. Which ones do you think applies to leadership?
So when I chose the word verdant, it's because I resonated the most with where it says green and flourishing. It's abundance. Basically, it means like there was a sentence I think that says a hill flourishing with green and growth. And that's really the whole point of what I do is if you can really lean into your leadership position, then you'll flourish, you'll grow, you'll provide life.
Mhm. That's really neat. On your site, you say that being a verdant leader refers to 6 different characteristics. So I'd like to just run through these because I think they're important. The first one you mentioned is authenticity. Why is that important to a leader?
Sure. So I have heard a lot of people say it's better to not reveal what you're going through until you're already healed from it. And while I can understand where other leaders are coming from with that, I don't fully agree with it. I think that there is a difference between showing up somewhere and bleeding on people versus showing up and being vulnerable with people. And I don't think that you can be your full self. I don't think you can show up as your full self if you're not being authentic in that way. So I have mental illness and physical illness. And there are some days where my mental illness might make me a little bit irritable or sad. And if I show up and I don't communicate that to my family or to my friends or to the people that I'm working with, and I show up with a bad attitude, that makes me look like somebody who's showing up as a bad attitude. But if I can show up and say, hey, this is something very real that I'm struggling with today. I'm doing my best. I'm sorry if my mood seems kind of low. I'm still going to put forth my best effort. I'm going to give you my best work. But just know that this has nothing to do with you. I just don't feel well today. I think that that's really important.
Were you always able to be vulnerable like that, or is it something that you had
No.
to work on?
So I grew up the eldest daughter and the eldest sibling and the eldest cousin. And so I've always been, I hate to say masking, but good at masking, I guess, my mental health. I started showing signs. I have bipolar type 2 disorder. I started showing symptoms of that at like as early as age 5. And so
Wow.
I learned at a very young age how to, I guess, mask that. I had younger siblings. My Some of my younger family members were bullied growing up. So I always had to be the strong one. I was the one that roughed people up if you hurt my so and so's feelings, things like that. And so yeah, I never really grew up feeling like I could be vulnerable in that way.
So what did it take to get to that point? What did you have to do to learn how to be vulnerable?
Really, it was realizing at some point that my family and my friends were also struggling. So seeing a younger cousin or somebody struggling or like a friend, seeing how difficult it was for them to admit that and how it really took a breaking point. So something significant happening or an argument where they would take the mask off and cry or reveal what was going on. I think I realized that it was my responsibility to be vulnerable in that way so that they could be vulnerable. And so, again, with just realizing it's your responsibility to give that permission to other people, and people can't be vulnerable with you if you're not vulnerable with them.
Mhm. Well said. The second one is, having organic growth. Why is that important in leadership?
So, so I can tell you, as far as my business goes, I really don't enjoy. I've written paid ads and things like that before, and I don't see the best long-term growth when it comes to that. I think that organic marketing and showing up consistently is the best way to advertise yourself and to build a good client base. I would say organic growth in a personal life would look like showing up consistently and intentionally. So, not being the person who only shows up when things are really good or really bad, but just on a day to day basis, making yourself available to the people that you love.
Hmm, okay. The third one is disruptive.
Yes.
Why do you consider that important?
Well, I I think it has a lot to do with the culture that I grew up in, kind of like what we talked about earlier. You submit, you say yes. You're not a disruptive person. You're someone who falls in line. You stick to the status quo. And I just don't think a good leader can do that. I think that having an opinion, being vocal about your feelings, if you see something, if you see a disparity or a misdoing, it's your responsibility to call that out and to invoke positive action to make positive change. And I think that that can be in personal life, in leadership, and in what I do as a business. People
Mhm.
that I usually write for are writing for a purpose. They have people that they are trying to pull leadership out of themselves, or they have a mental health focus or a well being focus. And those people have to be disruptive. They have to be the change within their industry.
Okay. Since you mentioned purpose, let's skip down to the fifth one is purpose driven. Why is that important?
So, kind of, I guess, we already said that I don't super believe in the whole calling aspect. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that people don't have a call in their life. I just mean that I think getting hyper focused on that one thing can be an issue. I think purpose driven specifically, we're all passionate about something. We all have a softened heart toward some things. And so I have this one client who is extremely passionate about the mental well-being of college students. And that is very specific, but that is where their heart lies. And so the content that they put out, the resources that they create. It is for parents and students in college who need that additional support for their mental health. Um, I've worked with people who are passionate about reform. And so, even if their business doesn't focus on reform, they are intentional about once or twice a year taking a certain amount of proceeds and giving it back to an organization. I think just having a purpose, having something that you put your focus toward or your money toward that makes a positive difference is what I mean by purpose driven. What is
Okay.
your purpose? What are you trying to accomplish?
We'll skip back to the fourth, which was influential. Speak to that.
So, again, with earlier, we all have a sphere of influence. I
Mhm.
don't think that influential necessarily means that you are the center of attention, you are the top dog at your company or in your industry. I think that it is being aware of who looks up to you. What does your day to day, who do you impact every day? Do you go to the same coffee shop every day? Do you see the same barista every day? That person is in your sphere of influence. And so if you're working in a specific industry, who are you influencing or who is your audience? I'm writing for you. Who is your target audience? How are you influencing them? Like what responsibility do you have for the people around you?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that. The sixth characteristic is nurturing. What does that look like as a leader?
I think that kind of falls not into, but I think it builds off of influence and kind of what we talked about earlier with instead of placing negative labels on someone, really seeing the good in every personality type, seeing the good in every person that you influence and pulling the best out of them. And so if you're creating resources for your audience, how does this benefit them? How when they finish your course or they finish your book or they listen to your podcast, how are you pulling the good out of them? What have you done to not necessarily change them, but to make what they already have and what they have within their power, how are you making them better? Seeing the good in everyone that you are around and pulling the best out of them, especially leaders. If you work in an office or you've got people who show up every day and they're answering to you, what's in it for them? How are you nurturing them and pulling the best out?
Yes. Yes, I think it's a change of perspective as a leader, instead of thinking, "Okay, what can I get out of this person?" You're
Yes.
you're thinking about, "How can I, be part of seeing this person grow and become the best person that they can be?"
Yes.
Well, I would add to this list courageous, and, you kind of, refer to it a little bit and or allude to it with disruptive. But, it kinda seems that in order to lead from a place of truth and reality where you truly are looking for the best for the people that you lead, or your organization is not gonna be necessarily a popular thing or one that makes you comfortable or makes you look good all of the time. And yet, you really have to have the courage to look beyond what is easy or comfortable and make those hard decisions. What do you think about that?
I would say I love the idea of adding courage to that list. I think I agree with you. I think I agree with you for sure. Uh, if I were going to give any budding leader one piece of advice, it would be to get used to being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And courage is not the absence of fear. So do it afraid. I don't know since I've started my entrepreneurial journey that I have felt comfortable in like 2 years. When people are like, get out of your comfort zone. I'm like, what is a comfort zone? What do you mean? None of this is in my chosen wheelhouse. I am building as I go, doing weird things like pitching myself, which is disgusting. And but I mean, how are people going to know that I'm a service provider if I'm not like, look, I provide services. So,
Right.
and
I
yeah, being disruptive and leading in that way is very uncomfortable, especially if it's not in your nature to be the center of attention. So,
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I say I live outside of my comfort zone most of the time.
yeah,
Yes, I
I am
totally agree.
constantly full of fear, but you have to do it anyways.
Yes. Well, you have no reason to be full of fear because you're very young, but you have a lot of wisdom. So just know
Thank
that
you.
going forward. To close, I realize you are very young, but we ask this question of all of our guests. So, looking back on lessons from living that you have gleaned from your life so far, what rises to the top for you?
I would say mentorship.
Hmm.
I the mentors that I have had in my life have been exceptional. Like I said, they've been very few and far between. There's been more bad leaders and poor experiences than good. But I'll say when I first started working, so I had my first job when I was 15, and it was a coffee shop. And I worked at that coffee shop until I moved to Texas in 2019. And the owner of that business was just phenomenal. She was the standard. When I'm talking about people who look at the good in everybody and they focus on those good things and they draw those good things out, she was the standard for that. I
Hmm.
was very shy, very uncomfortable in being in leadership positions, which is what I felt like, I guess, going into this job. So I've always been loud. I've always been disruptive. Like I said, I am the eldest at the end of the day. If anyone was going to show up to the principal's office, it was going to be me. Queen of detention, loved getting in trouble. But when I started this job, I realized that if I was going to get a paycheck, I was going to have to show up and do my job well. And she saw that in me. She saw that work ethic in me. And she's the one who really shaped my ability to recognize leadership as a positive and really altered my view. So instead of showing up to get a paycheck, I realized that, I'm serving people. I'm taking people's orders. Like the way that I interact with them could make their day worse or can make their day better. She gave me a sense of responsibility, and she's really well where my sense of community came from.
Hmm. That's such a gift, isn't it, when you have someone in your life like that?
Yeah. And like I'm really thankful that she was my first experience really too cuz I think that it helped me step away from bad things and bad jobs quicker than if I thought that the standard was poor leadership. I'm really
Mm.
thankful for her.
Yeah, that's important. Well said. Well, Lord Ray, where might my audience get in touch with you if they would like more information on this topic or would like to know more about what you're doing and offering?
Sure. So I'm the most active on LinkedIn. It's under my name. So Laura Ray Reed is what you'll find me under. I do have a website link in my bio, though. My website is a good place to get in touch with me if you actually want to work with me as far as my services go.
Hmm.
But if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm always down for a nice DM. Would love to connect and do virtual coffee dates. I love just building my network.
Hmm. Great. Well, we really appreciate your time today. I just love your perspective, and it interestingly, it just kind of worked in seamlessly with what we've been talking about here. So I'm excited to add your perspective.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast. I love the content that you put out. I do
Well,
think that you fall into the standard of good leadership. And what you're
oh,
doing
no.
is important, interviewing people.
I hope so. That is my hope and my prayer. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Laura Ray. It was so fun having you on today. As I said, you may be young, but you are mighty. You are very wise, and it was just so interesting to have your perspective. Friends, thank you again for being with us and listening. Be sure to get in touch with me if you would like to at lessonsfromliving.net, and we are on all the socials. So look us up and shoot me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And I will let you all go today with a word from Max Dupree. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between, the leader is a servant. Go out and make it a great day.